Ralph Ellis, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Russell. Good to be with you back again.
And we're here with Clayton as well, my producer.
Good morning, Russell Scott. Good morning, Ralph Ellis. Nice to meet you, Ralph.
Morning, Clayton.
Clayton, you're living in Edmonton, Alberta. I used to live there. Has the weather changed or become more extreme over the years? What's your experience with that?
Well, I noticed a big difference. I remember when I was little, the snow was crazy deep. Maybe it's because I was little. But it seems like we're having a lot more extreme weather. Thunderstorms, lots of thunderstorms at night, lots of rain, hot when it should be cold, cold when it should be hot. I don't know if it's me or just my perception, or if we're really having some changes. A lot of fires, right?
Yeah, I mean,
definitely see a difference. It's -5 here today.
It's -5. Yeah, that seems rather warm for this time of the year. But yeah. And then all of British Columbia was burning this summer. Ralph, is climate change a real thing?
Yeah, climate changes all the time. It's been changing for the last 4 billion years. This is why it's a little bit of a misnomer that they've turned global warming into climate change, because they found that the Earth wasn't warming and they were being mocked for the Earth not warming. And so now they've turned it into climate change. And you can't lose with that one, because the climate always changes. The question is, why is it changing? Is it CO2, as they claim? Is it man-made, as they claim? Or is this part of a natural cycle? Would these changes have been happening anyway? And are these changes as severe as they are making out? Those are the questions that are not being asked in the media, because the media is, dare I say it, is being controlled. I mean, I don't like this idea of conspiracies. However, they've all jumped onto this bandwagon. I tend to like the idea of bandwagons more than I do conspiracies. But this bandwagon came along, and you've got a choice. Do you jump onto it, which can be quite lucrative for some people, especially if you're in the scientific community, or do you stand up and say, no, I don't agree with it? And it just looks to me as though a lot of people have jumped on this bandwagon because they know that if you're on that bandwagon, you're part of the group, you're accepted. If you're not on that bandwagon, you're an outcast. And that can be an outcast socially, it can be professionally, it can be financially. And I've experienced this myself, because I am the outcast. Because I don't believe in this global warming, not in the way it's being presented to us. And to such an extent that I wrote several articles about this. I wrote articles back in 2004 on climate change and on renewable energy, before this really became part of the public domain. And recently I've written a peer review scientific paper on paleoclimatology, climate of the past. And they didn't like it because it impinged on what they've been saying about present climate. So part of my thesis was that CO2 does not cause global warming. That was a part of the climate paper, and I proved that to my satisfaction. For the climate past, paleoclimatology, this was about the ice ages and the causes of the ice ages. And if it applied then, well, surely it should apply now. The same rules, the same procedures. So, and that's what we're going to discuss, I think, later on.
Well, I have the NASA page up, right? The NASA website on my phone here. And it says, most climate scientists agree the main cause of the current global warming trend is human expansion of the greenhouse effect, warming that results when the atmosphere traps heat radiating from Earth towards space.
Yes.
So the sunlight comes into the Earth and the greenhouse gases trap it, and this is what makes it hotter. You can see this effect with black body radiation. It goes into your truck or your car, and in the summer, and it's sweltering in your vehicle because the heat can't get out.
Yeah. Now, in there is a problem with that, because that is greenhouse warming. That's how it's caused. However, for it to happen, as you say, that the heat is trapped, that heat has to be trapped and re-radiated back down to the Earth. That's how the greenhouse works. So instead of having a sheet of glass, the energy goes up into the atmosphere, it's absorbed by the atmosphere, and it's re-radiated back down to the Earth, and that's what warms the Earth. And that is called downwelling long wave radiation, DLR for short. And it is DLR that makes the surface of the Earth warmer. And as the greenhouse warming increases, so DLR must also increase, because it is the DLR that causes the surface warming. However, DLR has never been seen to increase. So the very fundamental core of the climate global warming theory has not been observed in practice. So they have instruments that look up at the sky and measure the amount of radiation coming down. They have actually satellites now that they've got these wonderful algorithms that can detect the radiation at different parts of the atmosphere, and they can tell what the atmosphere is radiating, and they can actually detect the DLR as well. And nobody has ever detected an increase in DLR. Now, we've only been having these records since about 97, so they don't go back that long. But no increase in DLR means no global warming, no increase in global warming. So they've disproved their own theory by not being able to detect any DLR. So that sort of proves that CO2 is not actually, the increase in CO2 is not causing the warming. And we can also see this from the models that they have made. So they've got these models that model the climate over the years, and they all show an increase in temperature. And I think there's something like 80 of these different models they've got. And not one of them has predicted the actual temperatures. So you've got all these models with these wonderful graphs going up showing the increase in temperature, but real temperature has remained virtually static for the last 20 years. So the models are not predicting what the Earth is actually doing in the real world. And as they say in science, if the data disagrees with your model, it's the model that's wrong. It's not the data that's wrong, it's your model that's wrong. And so we can confidently say 100% that all the models of CO2 warming are wrong. They all exaggerate the amount of warming we're supposed to be getting, but nobody will admit that. So we have a disconnect between reality and what is actually being told to us within the media. This is what upset me, because we talked about this some time ago, Russell, I think, when we did the talk on the Mary Magdalene book. And I was talking about, the bandwagons and people controlling the media and all of that sort of business, fundamentalist causes in the 21st century. And that was one of the aspects we talked about, that this had become a cause. It had become a religion almost, that you must believe in global warming, and if you don't, there will be repercussions. You'll be laid off from your job, you will be ostracized, you will not be allowed on the media, you will certainly not allowed to be on the BBC, that's for sure. We had a well-loved naturalist, David Bellamy, and he was the darling of the BBC because he had this wonderful West Country accent. He sounded like a real rustic, and he loved the environment, he loved animals, etc. And he was on the BBC every other week. And then he stood up and said he didn't believe in global warming, and poof, he disappeared. And everyone kept asking, where's he gone? Have they shipped him away to the gulags in Russia or something, because he just disappeared. And of course, it was because he voiced his opinion against global warming. So yeah, if you go against this new religion, you can lose your job. That's the long and the short.
Do you believe in conspiracies?
Yeah, I believe we don't get the truth on everything for sure. I think there's more to every story.
The thing is that this would require thousands of scientists to be in collusion.
Yeah, yes and no.
And that's not possible. I mean, a conspiracy only works when there are like 2 or 3 people involved. You know what I mean?
Yes.
When there are hundreds and thousands of people involved, the conspiracy just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. Which is why I don't believe in conspiracies.
There you go. I appreciate that.
But I do believe in bandwagons.
But yet what you're saying is sort of conspiratorial.
No, because I believe in bandwagons.
Explain the difference.
And okay, well, a bandwagon is 2 or 3 people. In this case, the climate lobby, the green lobby. So it's slightly more than 2 or 3 people. And they set out a bandwagon. And their bandwagon is, we want to save the Earth. The Earth is dying because of CO2. If you're a nice person, then you must join us to save the Earth. Otherwise, you're a bad person and horrible things will happen to you. This is our bandwagon. Oh, and by the way, if you join our bandwagon, you will get lots of media exposure. You will get your papers peer-reviewed and in all of the publications, etc. And this bandwagon grows and grows and grows. And finally, the people out there, the media, the reporters, the scientists, whoever it happens to be, the politicians, of course, they join in as well. They see this bandwagon going along. And this bandwagon has all these great things attached to it. Fame, fortune, media coverage, you name it. If you want to get your political point across, if you join this bandwagon, it will work. If you don't, you'll be ostracized. And people have a decision. Do we join the bandwagon and have an easy life? Or do we go against that bandwagon because that bandwagon is actually fundamentally dishonest and therefore I won't join it? And yes, I'll be ostracized. Yes, I'll lose my job like David Bellamy did in the BBC. Yes, but I don't care about that. I don't care about my family. I don't care about my mortgage. I'm going to go against this bandwagon. Those are the choices you have to make. And those are the choices that people have made. And it looks like a lot of people have jumped onto this bandwagon, some for ideological purposes, because that's the sort of thing they like to believe in, some for financial, some for political gain, some for fortune, fame and fortune. Many reasons for jumping on this particular bandwagon. But what this takes away is the need for a political control over it. You don't need a conspiratorial control over this bandwagon. It is self-perpetuating, and off it goes.
I think you see that a lot, not just with climate control, but gun control, political views, all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, there are many bandwagons out there, and you have your choice. Do you jump on the climate bandwagon? Do you join the gun control bandwagon? There are lots of them out there. Even major religions are effectively bandwagons. You have a choice. Do you jump on the Scientology bandwagon or the Church of the Latter-day Saints or something? You don't have to join it. It's not compulsory. There's no one making you do these things. But
have you felt the effect of this personally? Sorry, Ralph, have you felt the effect of this, not jumping on the bandwagon personally?
Yes, very much so. Because I wrote this, I ended up writing this peer-reviewed paper, and it was rejected on the basis that it did not go with the consensus. So it went against the climate lobby, and it quoted skeptic people, and it showed that I was a skeptic. And so there was one of the reviewers actually said that I appeared to be a denier. Now, that's a very pejorative sort of phrase to use in a scientific context. I'm making an argument, I'm making a theory. Not every theory that comes through peer review is correct. That's not the idea of peer review. It's not to say that your paper is correct. It's just that you've made the correct arguments, you've followed the right process, and you've got this opinion, basically. You've put forward a theory. That doesn't mean it's correct. So to be called a denier because you have an alternative view is a very poor choice of words for a scientist to make. And so, yes, if I had been a scientist, a paid scientist on the payroll of some university institution, that could have impacted my career. Now, I don't care because I'm not. I'm independent. So nothing they say or do against me has any effect. I can say what I like. So you can see perhaps why the 97% tend to agree with the consensus, because it will affect their positions if they don't. So what actually happened with this paper, I mean, it's a very, we'll go through the details in a minute. It's a very interesting paper on the ice ages. Because I was in discussion, we had had many of these discussions on blog sites and with other people. And it transpired that in the 21st century, we don't know why ice ages occur. And I was a bit shocked, actually. Why in the 21st century, such an obvious major change in our climate, do climate scientists not know why ice ages occur? So here is a major change in the climate. No humans, of course, no CO2. Well, they sort of indicate CO2, but this is a natural cycle that has happened many times. You know, we've had, I think there's about 8 ice ages in the last 800,000 years, roughly. What causes them? Why do they happen? And if we don't know why they happen, how can we say with such confidence what's happening to modern climate if we can't explain the ice ages? So this idea that the science is settled is totally incorrect.
Ralph, just to cut you off, buddy. 8 ice ages.
Yeah.
But people have this notion of the ice age. Was there a particularly large ice age that distinguishes itself from the rest, or what is the ice?
No, they refer to last ice age as just being the most recent one, which was ended about 15,000 years ago. So when they say the ice age, it's really talking about the last one, because that affected all of, you know, human existence, because obviously humans were around at that time, and all of the mammals that we're familiar with. And it affected all of those across the continents. So that's the one they're most interested in. But there were another 7, very, very similar in strength, way back to 800,000 years ago. So it's a regular event. Every 100,000 years, you get an ice age. And then you get an interglacial. So you get this, you end up with this temperature dropping down and down very slowly over about 90,000 years, getting colder and colder and colder until you reach what is called the glacial maximum. And then suddenly you get an interglacial. And the interglacial happens in just 5,000 years. So it's an instant, in geological terms, instant warming, where the poles warm by 12 degrees centigrade in 5,000 years. I mean, that's a huge warming. And we've had one of those just recently. It happened, you know, it started about 15,000 years ago. And then we had a slight glitch when it went a bit colder, and then it got warmer into the proper interglacial. And funnily enough, during the maximum of this interglacial is called the Holocene. And at the maximum of that point, the Holocene maximum, temperatures were 2 degrees warmer than now. So to say that we are really warm now is totally incorrect. Again, they're not being scientific, they're cherry picking, they're being political, they're spreading, in effect, disinformation, because the world was actually warmer 8,000 years ago than it is now. And we know that for sure, absolutely for certain, because if you look at the taiga forests in Siberia, they were 250 kilometers further north than they are now. So we know the world was warmer at that time, and all of those forests have retreated over the last 8,000 years. So yeah, climate changes. You can't go wrong with a theory called climate change, because yeah, it changes all the time.
Yeah, well, here's a question for you. I mean, surviving the ice age, that's always something that we think about. But can we survive this increase in temperature?
Well, you again, you have to look back into the climate record, and the Holocene maximum was much warmer than it is now. And of course, all of the mankind, all of the animals, most of the plants, all survived the Holocene maximum when it was warmer. Because remember, warmer is good, cold is bad. Cold is what kills you. More people die of the cold than they do in heat waves. And CO2 is good. No CO2 is bad, because CO2 is plant food. Without CO2, everything on this earth dies completely. Nothing can live without CO2. It's the most essential gas in the atmosphere. And that was the problem, and we'll come to this again within my theory, that was the problem during the Ice Age, because during the Ice Age, it gets colder and the seas chew up all the CO2. They absorb the CO2 and take it in. And CO2's got down to such a low extent that all the plants were dying. And if the plants die, then the mammals and all the animals die with them.
What do you think they have to benefit from the disinformation or calling it or blaming it on CO2 then? Why do you think that's the case? Is it geoengineering? What's the benefit to them doing that?
I think this was a greenie. Well, you have to look at the goals of Maurice Strong, who set this up, and his goals were overtly political. So you've got two strands of this. You've got the political, which comes from Maurice Strong, who was trying to set up a communist one world government. And for a communist one world government, you need one world institutions. And for one world institutions, you need one world problems. To get away from national problems, you need a problem that affects the whole world. So most definitely from Maurice Strong, his idea was political. Then, of course, you get the Greens jumping on as well, because they want to control the environment. And so you get them jumping onto the same bandwagon, but not necessarily for the same purpose. And so you get all these greenies jumping on because they want to be nice to the earth. They want to save the earth. They want to feel good to themselves because they're saving the planet. You know, they're good people. Everyone else, like Trump, is a real evil person because he doesn't want to save the planet. You know, all this sort of stuff. So you get the
straw man
do-good. Yeah, you get the do-gooder element jumping on board as well. And yeah, strange bedfellows, but of course, you know, that's why many people call them watermelons, is because they are green on the outside, but they're red on the inside, as in communist on the inside. So, I mean, those are the reasons that people have jumped on this particular bandwagon. But the bandwagon, in my estimation, is based on a fallacy. It's based on the CO2 fallacy. As I said, CO2 is good. During the dinosaur era, we had huge, great animals Why did we have huge great animals? Because CO2 was 5 times higher during the dinosaur era, during the Cretaceous and the Jurassic era, was 5 times higher than it is now. Why is that good for us? Well, because CO2 is plant food. CO2 gives you bigger plants. Bigger plants gives you bigger plant eaters and herbivores, and bigger herbivores gives you bigger carnivores, and all life flourishes. You take the CO2 away and everything dies. So as a fundamental, CO2 is good for us. So opposition to CO2 means you want to condemn people to starvation.
Okay, but I got to stop you here. How do you say that we have less CO2 now when we're pumping CO2 into the atmosphere on a daily basis with our cars, with our...
It's called sequestration. So during the dinosaur era, we had very, very high CO2, 2,500 parts per million, roughly. But CO2 is plant food. Plants grow, plants die, they all fall into the ground, and because well, basically, if they're not eaten by mushrooms and other things and re-put back into the atmosphere, that CO2 can be locked away in the geology, into coal, into limestone, etc., etc. And it's locked away within the strata in the earth itself. And so that CO2 has gone down and down and down over the years, down and down and down, until we've arrived, before man came along recently, down to about 300 parts per million, 280 parts per million. That's all we had. So much, much less than, almost a tenth less, a tenth of the CO2 that we used to have in the atmosphere. So it's been locked away, and all man is doing, man is finding the coal that was locked away in the Cretaceous and the Jurassic period and burning it and returning that CO2 back into the atmosphere, which is where it came from in the first place. So we're actually doing the world a favor, because if the world had carried on as it was and man hadn't been here, the world would have locked up so much CO2 that in another, well, not even, maybe 5 million years, there'd have been no CO2 left. And then all life on Earth dies. So we've actually saved the Earth from destruction by putting CO2 back in the atmosphere.
Okay, so let's talk about conspiracies again. You know, this idea about the one world government, you mentioned that, which sort of ties into this Rockefeller conspiracy and this idea that they're going to reduce the world's population of 500 million people. Could this restriction of CO2, which you say has a counter effect, which is bad for life, is this about eliminating life on Earth?
No, I don't.
World population.
No, because that would destroy everything. I don't think they've thought this through. As I say, this is more of a bandwagon than a conspiracy. And this particular bandwagon came along, and it seemed useful to some people, and so they jumped upon it. And I don't think they actually looked too deeply within it to see whether it was true, not true, plausible, not plausible. They just jumped on it because it contained all of the elements they needed for their particular purpose, whether it was expansion of communism or whether it's expansion of environmentalism via the Greens. It had what they wanted, you know. We must be nice to the earth, you know, all this sort of stuff. So I don't think they were looking any deeper than that. But what they didn't do is a full analysis of what actually CO2 does to the atmosphere. And this is where it comes back to my Ice Age theory, which I've, as we said before, I've just had published as a peer review science paper. Because if we can explain the Ice Ages, then we can explain what's happening perhaps to the current climate.
Yeah.
And
so we have some graphs here. You just let me know when you want me to pull them up.
Oh, if you put the simple one up initially, this is a graph. of, it's got the blue and red lines on it. This is a graph of temperature of the ice ages. This is the last million years. That's the complex one, the other one. That one. So this is going back, okay, this only goes back 500,000 years, but it's got several of the ice ages on it. So the red plot is the temperature, and the blue plot is the orbital characteristics of the Earth. And as you see, the temperature increases sort of agree with the change in the Earth's orbit. And so we know that the Earth's orbit is something to do with ice ages. And it is. So we can perhaps go off that particular one. So each of those, yes, on that one, the blue plot again is on the top of this particular graph. So that is the change in the Earth's orbit. And we don't need to go in this in any great detail, but you have two main changes in the Earth's orbit. We have precession and obliquity. And they change the temperature of the Earth the same as a normal year does. So for clarity's sake, I call this the Great Year. In fact, it's been known as the Great Year for thousands of years. The Egyptians called it the Great Year as well. This is why I first started talking about the Great Year, in fact, because it's a central part of our old religions, Egyptian religion, Jewish religion, Christianity. They were all following precession. And what it does is it changes the amount of sunlight effectively coming down on the Earth. But instead of over 1 year, you know, so a normal year will go between summer and winter over 1 year, changing the amount of heat and sunlight in the northern hemisphere and then the reverse in the southern hemisphere. Well, this does exactly the same, but it does it over 21,000 years. So not a single year, it does it over 20,000 years. So we call this the Great Year. And it does exactly the same. It causes more heating in the northern hemisphere and then alternately more heating in the southern hemisphere. So we get great summers and great winters. And they are something to do with ice ages. And you can see the ice ages on this graph because the amount of ice is the gray area underneath the sort of light blue turquoise color. That is the amount of ice. And you can see the amount of ice increases very slowly, going up and up and up, and then suddenly it all disappears within 5,000 years. That's the interglacial. And then it goes all the way back up again, and then it all disappears. And it keeps on doing this for the last million years. It's been doing this same little cycle all the time. So we have a good idea why ice ages start, because ice ages always start when we have a great winter. So a great winter makes the northern hemisphere colder, and snow obviously falls. We get a great snowfall. And the particular thing about snow is it's very bright. So it has a high albedo. And what it does is it reflects the sun away. And so you come to a normal and
for the audience and for myself, what is albedo?
Albedo, it's high reflectivity. So ice will have high albedo, whereas black tarmac will have a very low albedo. So it's the reflectivity of the ground. And ice has a very high albedo, so it reflects all the sunlight away. And so you can get a normal annual summer when the sun comes up high in the northern hemisphere, but all that sunlight is just reflected away because you've got snow all the way over Canada, Northern America, you know, it's all just covered in snow. And if you've got sufficient there that it doesn't melt in the summer, well, you've just reflected away all of that sunlight. And so that's a huge, great cooling effect on the climate. And so the climate cools. And we start this process of building up an ice age where the ice builds up and up and up until we get these ice sheets over Canada and so on that spread all the way down to the Great Lakes. They didn't stop until the Great Lakes in America. And over Canada, they were 3 kilometers high. I mean, 3,000 meters of ice stuck over the top of Canada. That's climate change. That really is climate change. But how do you get rid of that ice? And how do you get rid of it within 5,000 years? You know, it's taken 90,000 years odd to build up this ice to its greatest extent, and suddenly it disappears in 5,000. How do you manage? Well, you can probably take that graph off now. If we go back to the classical explanation of why that ice disappears, it's because of increased sunlight again via this great year, so you get a great summer, plus CO2. And that's always been the explanation, that it's plus CO2. It's CO2 that's trying to cause this warming. But as I demonstrated, the amount of CO2 that's increasing year by year during the interglacial is virtually nothing. What we want is a very, very strong warming and a very, very strong feedback agent to cause that warming. And the feedback agent, which no one has considered before, is dust. Because I noticed that if you go through the ice records, so they've done these cores that go through the ice, and they've taken the cores out, and it's got all the layers of all the years going back 800,000 years. That's why we know what the climate is 800,000 years ago, because we have these ice cores, and more recently we've had the seabed cores, which show the climate all the way back 800,000 years. And it just so happens that every time we come up to an interglacial warming period, there is a whole load of dust. And in my theory, it is the dust that's causing the warming and not the CO2. CO2 is playing no part whatsoever. So how does dust cause warming? Well, if you get a load of dust and you spread it all over the ice sheets are no longer white. They're all covered in gray dust, and now you've lowered their albedo, and now they can absorb the sunlight. It's a bit like the piles of snow you get at the side of the road in the spring in North America, and obviously in Canada as well. You get these piles of snow, and you get all this dust and dirt on the top of the piles of snow, because the dirt stays on top of the snow, and that will melt the snow because that's absorbing the sun. The snow isn't. It's the dirt and muck that's on the top of the snow that is melting the snow. And that is what happens. That's why the interglacial happens.
So you wrote this and you sent it to Wikipedia. What was your experience with that?
Yes. Well, that's it. Well, just before we go to Wiki, because that is an interesting part of this, the main question which has caused most consternation to most people in the scientific community. And this paper has been downloaded now 18,000 times and read 18,000 times. So it's been spread around. The question is, why do we get dust all of a sudden? So we get no dust for the whole of the Ice Age for 90,000 years, and then suddenly you get dust. Why do we get dust all of a sudden? This is the bit they don't like. Because what happens is CO2 goes down and down and down and down because the oceans are absorbing all the CO2 as it gets colder. And so CO2 goes down to 180 parts per million, less than half of what we have now at present. And it just so happens that 190 parts per million is the point at which plants start to die, because they don't have enough CO2. And so what happens is when we get down to 180 parts per million, all of the plants in high altitudes, where obviously the air pressure is even less at high altitudes, all of the plants in high altitudes start to die. And more specifically, they happen to die on the Gobi Desert in northern China and Mongolia. And so the whole of the Gobi Desert, which is not a full desert at present, it's not a shifting sand desert, it's rough grazing pasture at present. The whole of that area becomes a shifting sand desert. And it's the dust from that huge now great Gobi Desert, which is, you know, thousands of miles long, that is now blown onto the northern ice sheets. And that's where the dust comes from. And so what causes global warming, in this case, the interglacial warming, what causes global warming is low CO2. Not high CO2, low CO2. Because we have a conundrum in ice ages. During the ice ages, obviously they've plotted the CO2 as well as the temperature. Yeah, so we know what the CO2 levels were. When CO2 is high, the world cools. When CO2 is low, the world warms. Completely the opposite of what they're trying to say at present. But that's a fact. I mean, you can look it up on any chart. In fact, it was on the, I haven't sent it to you. It was on the first chart in the paper I wrote. So that is just a fact of science. When CO2 is high, the world cools. When CO2 is low, the world warms. It's the opposite of what they're saying. And that has to be explained. You cannot explain why that happens with CO2 as the major feedback that causes warming and cooling. However, you can explain that with dust and reflectivity, albedo, because when CO2 is low, plants die, you get more dust, and therefore you get less albedo. So it is explainable, but not in terms of CO2 being the feedback. And that's what they didn't like about my paper. So my paper was branded as being a denier paper. So when I went to Wikipedia, obviously there are sections in Wikipedia on ice ages and various other subjects. And so very kindly, my paper was put onto Wikipedia in the article about, I think it was the Ice Age article. And it just said, you know, new theory caused by dust, albedo, etc., etc. And it was removed by the gatekeepers. I'm not sure if readers and viewers are aware of the system on Wikipedia, but anybody can post on Wikipedia. So anyone can make a change and put their views there.
But there are moderators, and they,
yes,
you know, if they don't like your thing, and I've seen this with other people who've had their entire pages removed.
Yes. I've had mine removed as well.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, there is not a Ralph Ellis page.
There's a great saying that Wikipedia works really well in practice, just not very well in theory. And it has to do with that whole accountability thing. If you could go to the Guinness Book of Records and put yourself as a record, it takes some accountability and almost like an oath from the person or the people responsible for creating this. When they don't let you do that, that causes a whole other issue.
Yeah, I mean, I can see from Wikipedia's perspective, there is a problem that you don't want people putting rubbish onto Wikipedia. So there has to be some sort of accountability. There has to be some sort of moderation. And so you do get these gatekeepers who patrol Wikipedia and knock off whatever they don't like. But as with the media, as with politics, most of these gatekeepers have joined the bandwagon because so many people have. And of course, you know, wiki gatekeepers don't have any particular financial benefit from joining this bandwagon. It just makes them feel good, I suppose. But anyway, they've joined the bandwagon and they are confirmed warmists. And so the gatekeeper involved in this particular one, who's quite famous actually on Wiki as being a bit of an arse, and so he said, well, we can't have this paper on Wiki because it was written by a denier. And I had to say, well, hold on a minute. What do you mean by a denier? You know, Sir Isaac Newton was a denier. So was Copernicus. He was a denier. They all went against the current views, you know, within science at that time. So what do you class as being a denier? Can you fault the actual paper itself, what it's actually trying to say? Have you found any errors in it? Oh, that's not our role within Wikipedia to say whether a paper is correct or not. But you're a denier, and therefore you can't go on. See, normally within Wiki, they won't accept any information unless it's from an approved source or a peer-reviewed science paper. And normally, if you have a peer review, that means that your paper has already been assessed by the scientific community. And therefore, you're, as I said before, it's not necessarily correct, but it's a valid argument to make within the scientific community. And therefore it will be allowed on Wiki. Except, of course, if you're a denier. And now you can't have your paper on there because you're a denier. And so they took it off. And they took off my page as well, because I had a Wiki page as well, and they deleted that as well. So anyone now who wants to know about ice ages is being denied this viewpoint, which I think is correct, and many other people think is correct as well, but they're being denied the opportunity to actually see if this is a valid method of modulating the ice ages, because Wiki won't give the information. And neither will the scientific community. You know, the Royal Society said the same. They would not publish my paper because they said I was a denier. And so that information is now suppressed. You're not allowed to know about it. So again, we have this problem. You know, they say the science is settled, and yet nobody knows. There is no explanation for why ice ages are modulated at present. I put forward a theory, and they say, no, you can't say that because you're a denier.
How do you get your word out then, and how do people get to see the other side of this? And does it affect your investors, or how do you get the investment money to proceed with this if you can't get it out and if you're a denier?
That's the problem. You see, if I was a professional dependent on this for my salary, I'd be in a very, very difficult situation. As it happens, they can't do anything to me because I did this privately. I took 2 years off work and I wrote this science paper out of my own finances. And with the help of another heretic who was a scientist in Canada, actually. He was in Waterloo University. Never met the guy, but found him online, and he said, look, I'll guide you through the ropes to make this a successful paper, which he did very well. So the whole thing was privately funded. And because the Royal Society and other people wouldn't take it, we eventually went to China. Because with my book writing, I have substantial contacts in China, because all of my books have been printed in Beijing, in Mandarin, so they've all been translated into Mandarin. And so I had these contacts in China. I just went to the Beijing University, which is an international institution. You know, it's well known. It's an established institution, well respected. And they said, yeah, we'll look at this. Yeah, because we don't really care about the climate lobby. Because remember, there's a difference over there. You know, we're so concerned about this climate lobby that we want to destroy our industry. You know, we want to turn off all of our power stations. We want all this wonderful intermittent power supplies where your electricity will go off, you know, every other day when the wind stops blowing, all that sort of stuff. We've gone down that road of destroying our industries and making very, very, very high cost energy for both domestic heating and for industry as well. In China, of course, it's the complete opposite. They're not wedded to this at all. And in the Far East, including China, there are planned over the next 20 years 1,500 new coal-fired power stations have been planned for the next 20 years. That's what's going
China is producing more CO2 than anyone.
Absolutely, yeah. And they're going to
Okay,
produce
thank
more and
you.
more and more.
So whether or not they're doing the world a favor is disputable, right?
Yes.
They're making money because to make money, you got to produce CO2.
Yeah, because you need cheap energy, because cheap energy is what makes the world
Right.
tick.
So I'm saying you have a peer-reviewed paper out of Beijing, the last place on Earth that would have anything wrong with a paper that is, anti-climate change in the sense of CO2 production would be Beijing University.
Yeah, and this is what you get. You say to people, within the scientific community,
Clayton,
okay,
are you
this
wearing a mask?
he is, yeah. There's too much CO2 over there.
That's what all the Chinese people do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and for good reason as well.
Have you seen Chinese people walking around with fucking respirators?
Yeah.
So you get what I'm saying, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And this is what people say. They say
they have a vested interest in not discussing climate change.
Yeah. So they say that your science paper is not valid because it's been peer reviewed in China, and therefore we don't trust the Chinese. They're not good scientists, and they're in favor of they don't believe in global warming, and they're in favor of more coal-fired power stations, and therefore your paper is not valid. To which my instant response is, well, are you being racist? Because that kills the argument straight away, because you're dealing with liberals, of course, and they're now saying the Chinese are stupid, which I've already had several scientists say that basically that the Chinese are stupid, so therefore they can't do peer review.
No. Stupid, no. Corrupt, yeah.
Yeah, well, possibly, but the instant response to that is, are you being racist? Oh, no. The second response to that is Beijing University understands that it's climbing the rungs of the academic ladder, and therefore to get their papers published by Elsevier, who's the big scientific publishing group. Obviously, this is not just published by Beijing University. This is published in Europe by Elsevier, which is the big scientific paper publishing group. To get them there, they have to agree to have 2 American reviewers as well. It was actually reviewed by 3 Chinese and 2 American reviewers. So it's had a Western review as well. It was just done through the auspices of Beijing University and not Harvard or something else, or MIT or whatever. So it's as valid as any other peer review process. And to be honest, I was not impressed by the peer review process within the West anyway. Everyone looks at the peer review process and says, it was done by X university and therefore it's fantastic, it's wonderful. And yet some of the peer reviews I had from the Royal Society were absolutely nonsensical. I mean, one of these scientists, and I don't know who it was because they did a private peer review. They were supposed to do an open review. That's what it said in their prospectus, but they decided not to do open review and know who's doing the reviewing because it was a skeptic paper. And so I had no idea who was doing the reviews. But anyway, one of these scientists, he did a review and he said, this paper is nonsense because the concentration of CO2 at sea level is the same as the concentration of CO2 on the top of a mountain. And therefore, plants will not be starved of oxygen as you go up a mountain because there's exactly the same concentration of CO2 on the top of the mountain. And I'm looking at this thinking, is this guy really a scientist? So I had to, you know the problem with this. Everyone knows the problem with this. So I had to reply, well, excuse me, if you go to the top of Everest, are you going to be short of oxygen? Because the concentration of oxygen on Everest is exactly the same as the concentration at sea level. there's just less of it. And this was, one of the reasons why my paper was rejected, and it was just so laughable. The problem with the paper, I think, is that science has become very specialist. And so we've got these very narrow-viewed scientists who know their own subject very well, but don't know the rest of the subject outside their own speciality. And this particular paper needs a polymath, because it spreads a wide subject. It goes all the way from orbital mechanics all the way through to plant biology, all in one paper. And unless you have a good understanding of the whole of the scientific world, you're not going to be able to review it. And that's exactly what happened. You could see where an individual scientist was hot on a particular subject and had no idea about another. And so the peer review process, as far as I'm concerned, was broken anyway, because these guys had absolutely no idea what was going on. So yeah, just to say a paper is peer reviewed is not necessarily a guarantee of its quality. Much better is to go to somewhere like What's Up With That. I don't know if you've heard of that one, Russell. What's Up With That is a skeptic blog site, which is the biggest climate blog site in the world, run from a guy down in California, specifically for skeptic views. And it just points out all of the opposite information to what you generally get. So a lot of what we're being told is actually disinformation. I'll just give you a few examples. Number of tornadoes in America has been decreasing since the 1960s. Now, is that what you're being told via the media? No, I don't think so. But if you look at the NCDC, NOAA...
I'll just stop you right there.
Yeah.
So you see the number of tornadoes, but
what number of strong, yeah.
What about the severity?
The number of strong and severe tornadoes has been decreasing since the 1960s. I should have given you those graphs as well. While we're doing this, I'll quickly look for a couple of those graphs. The number of hurricanes and typhoons has been decreasing since 1985. They've actually been going
activity, fires. It's not increasing. We're just being led to believe that, because I'm seeing more of it myself.
Well, I'm not sure about fires because, well, actually, I think even fires as well. I saw data on fires as well that was saying that fires had decreased because we have, of course, greater management. What happens with the fire situation is we've built houses all over the place. So now you hear about the fires because it's now burning down houses left, right, and center over California. Whereas before that would have just been a forest hilltop, and no one would have given a damn if a fire had gone through that region. But now you've got a town there with all these expensive houses, and suddenly it's news on the television. So there are various reasons why you get to hear about this. But even basic things like Antarctic ice temperatures have been steady for 50 years. They haven't changed. Antarctic sea ice.
Ralph, come on. I mean, that's not possible.
But it is.
The Larsen sea shelf just would have 2 months.
No, that's the Antarctic Peninsula. That's nothing to do with Antarctica. That is a little tiny piece of Antarctica that sticks out towards Argentina. And it's a 1% of the whole of Antarctica. And that little bit of it is warming. But the rest of it has maintained the same temperature. Do we have 5 minutes to dig up some graphs? Can I dig up some
graphs? Yeah, send me the links and we'll post them.
Yeah. Okay. Give me a couple of minutes and I'll just look up a couple of graphs. 5-10
minutes left in the show. Thank you so much, Ralph, for being a guest on the program again, of course.
Where are you joining us from today, Ralph?
I'm in England at present, so I'm late evening.
You guys can check out
for the audience, Clayton, what's the website for Ralph Ellis?
It's edfu-books.com, so edfu-books.com. You can check out Ralph Ellis. Also, you can check out the Russell Scott Show on YouTube. Like, share, Subscribe, please. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. If you like what you're seeing, please come and join us more often.
Yeah, I'm at Russell Scott 12, and you are
At Basic Clay.
At Basic Clay with no number. That's incredible.
Yeah. The real deal.
Let's have a quick look at this. Nope.
I've been to the Columbia ice fields many times in my life, and I've noticed over the last 15 years, I can see how much it's receded. That's one of the things I've noticed that make me realize it.
I think what Ralph is saying is that these aren't uncommon things. There are cycles throughout history, right? Clearly, within a lifetime, we might see changes, but are they abnormal changes throughout the course of the timeline of the Earth? No.
Fair enough.
I'm still looking here. Number of strong and violent tornadoes. This one isn't. Let me quickly send you this one. This doesn't go up to 2017. I shall try and.
From Breitbart.com, is it?
No, this is NOAA. So NOAA is quite an established place to get information from.
So I'll do a screen share there.
Let's just let me give you Ryan Moe.
You can see this number of strong to violent F3, F5 tornadoes, US.
Yeah, we can see it when you're talking. As soon as Ralph Ellis talks, though, it disappears when we see his camera, unfortunately.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, so you can see that, and that's pretty much steady. If you go through to 2016, which I haven't found the graph as yet, it's going slightly down. This data is from NOAA, which is the big climate agency in America. It's well respected. This one is, if I can just get this image for you. This is total energy, total accumulated cyclone energy. So this one is the number of hurricanes and typhoons. Again, that's not the most recent. It goes up to 2016. So that one's fairly recent. And you can see on that one that it's gone down since 1990, roughly. The number, not only the number, but the total energy.
So essentially, these graphs, I mean, here's the thing, is data can always be interpreted in a certain way to corroborate your theory. That's always been a truth about facts and figures. There's always a fact and a figure that will corroborate your story.
Yes. Two things about that. These are facts from established agencies. This is NOAA, NCDC information. The information I get is from the Snow Lab, the Rutgers Snow Lab from UAH, the University of Huntsville in Alabama. This is ready, established, trusted information. The other thing about it is we're not getting it. So this information is here. It's on the net. You only have to go out and have a look at it. But it's not getting into the media. It's not getting into politicians. It's not getting into the public arena. And you have to ask yourself, why is this happening? Why are we not getting the full information? Why are we only getting a selected cherry-picked amount of information? And you gave a classic one there where you said, oh yes, the ice in Antarctica is all melting. And if you listen to the BBC, if you listen to CNN, that's exactly what they will say. And that's so untrue. It's annoying. what they're talking about is the Antarctic Peninsula, which is a little tiny bit of Antarctica that pokes, as I say, up towards Argentina. And it's nothing to do with the rest of the continent whatsoever. So they're focusing on this little tiny part of Antarctica. And the rest of Antarctica, sea ice in Antarctica has been growing for the last 30 years. So sea ice in Antarctica is at its highest ever extent. They broke a record only about 2 years ago, I think it was, with the most amount of sea ice ever in Antarctica. Now, hold on a minute. That changes the equation somewhat, because of course Arctic ice, we all know, is decreasing, and this is what they keep jumping on about and shouting and jumping up and down. Sea ice is decreasing. But that's only Arctic sea ice. If you go down the other end and have a look at Antarctica, it's actually increasing. So globally, if you look at the global ice record from Cryosphere Today, which is an established agency, it's about steady, really, because what's happening in the north is being compensated for by what's happening in the south. But that's not the information we're being given, and so we can't make an informed choice about what's happening because we're not being given the full picture. And if we're not being given the full picture, this is no longer science. This is advocacy. This is politics. You're trying to put forward an agenda by giving one side of the information and not the other side, so we can't make up our mind. Like with that chart you just showed about the amount of hurricanes and cyclones in the Pacific and the Atlantic. They're both going down and have been going down since the 1990s. That doesn't suit the agenda. Yeah, that one. So that's the total energy, total cyclone energy for each year from the 1990s has been going down. That doesn't suit their agenda. And so you had that recent hurricane went through America, and you had these agencies saying, oh, climate change, climate change. What they didn't tell you was that this was the longest period ever in recorded history where America has not had a hurricane landfall. So it was 11 years. It was 11 years between the previous one, which was probably the one that went through the town on the south coast, New Orleans. Yeah, the New Orleans one. It was 11 years from that hurricane all the way through to the one that was this year. And that's the longest period in American history without a landfall hurricane in America. But nobody said that. So nobody gave us the full information. And therefore, again, that's politics. That's not science.
Ralph, we got to enter here. One last question. If the human race, I think that's what we're really concerned about. It's not so much the Earth itself. I think we're concerned about whether or not humans can survive this, right? Is it by fire or by ice?
That's a good question, because that's the question I was asked to answer in a new paper, because several scientists got on to me, more of the skeptic scientists, and they wanted to know, when is the next ice age? Because these ice ages are regular, they happen all the time. We know why they happen. They happen because of these orbital cycles. And it so happens that we are on the cusp of a new ice age. So all of the orbital positions are correct for having another ice age. The question is, will we have one? And if we do, no. The question is, when will it happen? Because we know another one will happen, but when will it happen? And so I crunched a few numbers and had a look at the orbital position of the Earth over the next couple of thousand years. And it was my estimation that without man's interference, we would go into a new ice age in the next 1,000 years. So quite, in geological terms, very, very, very soon, we will dip back into a new ice age. because all of the characteristics are there. The one thing mitigating circumstance is we have low eccentricity at present, which means we won't have a very severe great winter. But nevertheless, we are looking towards a new ice age. However, now we know why ice ages happen, we can actually reverse it. So if we know that ice ages are caused by dust, if interglacial warming is caused by dust, then we know how to warm the Earth. So all we need to have is a bunch of 747s running across the top of Canada, spraying all the ice sheets with soot and dust, and bingo, you get rid of all your ice age. So yeah, we can geoengineer to stop it.
Clayton is already bundled up and ready.
We're ready here in Canada.
Coming
Well.
ice.
You're going to get it first.
Well, that's only good to minus 30.
And it's not much good if you have 3 miles of ice on top of you.
I just spent 2.5 months in the warm city of Vancouver and came back to Alberta. I'm not climatized yet. It's pretty tough.
How cold does the ice age get, Rel?
Well, on top of the ice sheets, you're talking easy minus 50. It's 3 miles up for a start, so you're much colder up there. It's cold.
We haven't talked about, actually. Sorry to cut you off. NASA scientists are saying, and this is NASA, right? These are the guys that are, as I showed earlier, they have a completely different theory as to you. But they're saying that the sun is going through a cooling cycle in 2025 or something like this. And it will continue for about 10 years. And that the Earth should expect a cooling cycle.
Yes.
Have you heard this?
Yes. I agree with that. Not necessarily caused by the sun, because we think the sunspot cycle does have an effect on climate, because when we had very few sunspots back in the 18th century, we had a cold period known as the Little Ice Age. So it's quite possible that when we have
how hot the sun is, you can't even look at it without
no, but it does have a cycle. It has this 11-year sunspot cycle.
It has an incredible effect on the Earth. I'm sorry. I think it's
well, no, we think
number one.
We think the effect might be through magnetism, because its magnetism changes quite a lot. Its output, its actual solar output, is more or less constant, but its magnetism does change, and we think possibly that the changes in the sun's magnetism might change the climate on the Earth. But the other big, no, not big, the other minor change we have on a 60-year cycle is the PDO and AMO oceanic cycles. So there are cycles within the Pacific which have a 60-year cycle, and that may be affecting our climate on a smaller scale than say the Little Ice Age. So over that 60-year cycle, the 1930s were warm, the 70s were cold, the 90s were warm, and now we're going back into the cold period again. So if you think about our climate, the 1930s, well, that was the Dust Bowl America, that was very hot. 1970s, when they were predicting a new ice age in the 1970s, it was a colder period then. 1990s, well, that was up into the zeros, that was a warmer period. So it does appear that Northern Hemisphere climate, and especially American climate, is governed within sort of plus or minus 1.5 degrees by these oceanic cycles. And according to these oceanic cycles, we're on the down path into a cold period. And so it's quite possible that America and Canada will have a cold next 10 or 15 years. And that's nothing to do with, the greater scheme of ice ages. That's just a change in the oceanic cycles in the Pacific. So yeah, from that point of view, that's may maybe what happens over the next 15 years. And funnily enough, within the climate, you remember the Climate Gate emails where they had this big scandal that they were saying things they shouldn't within the climate community. One of the emails that came out from that little expose was one of the climate scientists writing to another scientist saying, if all this warming is just oceanic cycles, then they'll hang us. Because he was admitting that he knew about the oceanic cycles, that they were on a warming trend in the oceanic cycles. And of course, that warming trend must come to an end at some point, which is in the just about now, of course. And the temperatures might go back down again. And if they do, then politicians will hang all of the climate scientists. So we await to see what happens.
Climate change, as you said at the very beginning of the show, the climate always changes.
Yeah.
So extreme temperatures, climate change, it all works together, right? It was only the global warming brand that didn't work.
Yeah, but what they're saying is that climate change runs on the back of global warming. So CO2 causes warming, and the warming will cause climate change. But of course, if the northern hemisphere suddenly cools, well, that no longer works. You know, you've just bust your theory. So that's what they're dreading. They're dreading a cooling trend in the northern hemisphere over the next 10 years.
Ralph, always a pleasure to have you on the show. You're never contemporary or...
How many times has Ralph been on the show? How many times have you been on the show, Ralph?
Oh, I don't know. How many have we done now, Russell? We've done quite a few, haven't we?
I don't know. It's somewhere around 20.
Yeah. How many views?
We have well over 1 million views with Ralph Ellis, the #1 guest on the show.
Good job, Ralph. Thanks to have you.
Thanks,
Ralph, tell the audience about yourself. Who is Ralph Ellis in a nutshell? Those who don't know.
In a nutshell, it's getting broader and broader, isn't it? Well, primarily, I look into revisionary theology, so looking at the history, the real history of theology. And I have 10 books on that series, which we've covered in all of our interviews. They're available on my website, which is edfu-books.com, EDFU, edfu-books. And my Facebook site, which is Ralph Ellis -144, I think it is. And the science paper, that's slightly different. That is on Science Direct, and I think it's called Modulation of Ice Ages via Dust and Albedo. So if you do a Google search for that, it'll come out on Science Direct, and there's a little, it's freely available because it was all paid for by the Chinese. It was great because these papers are very expensive. You know, you've got to pay a lot of money to get them published, and very, very kindly the Chinese paid for it, so it's all free. And so there's a link there to the PDF, and you can download the PDF.
All right. Well, Ralph Ellis, thank you so much for once again being a guest on the program. Good show.
Thanks, Russell, and thanks, Clayton, as well.
Nice to meet you, Ralph. Pleasure's all mine.
All right. So once again, check out Ralph Ellis at edfu-books.com. Am I right?
That's
correct. You can find his books on Goodreads and Amazon. He's got a ton of them.
Yeah, they're good too. I bought the best book I had from you was the one about Jesus, King of Edessa.
Yeah, that was an interesting one.
That was such a good book. I ended up, I read it. Took a couple of days because it's a long book. But I ended up lending it to a friend. Well, that friend never gave that book back.
I'm sorry about that, Russell Scott. I'm sorry, man.
It wasn't you. You don't read.
I'm going to have to send you another one there, Russell.
But it was a hard copy, right? Like, because I know you're doing a lot of things online now with.
Yeah, the tablets have taken over a little bit. I do 50-50 hardbacks and tablets, and the tablets have taken over slightly. And they're good from my perspective because you can update them and give new additions and all that sort of stuff, and you can have all the color diagrams, and some of them have got video clips in them and things like that. So they're quite good. I like them. The paperbacks are catching up now because they now have this print-on-demand business. And so you don't have to keep a stock of books. It's all done by these super laser printers, and you buy it, and the laser printer prints a personal copy just for you and sends it off to you. So it's quite a good service.
Ralph, can you send both myself and Clayton a soft paper, how fucking say,
A paperback
copy? This is why I hate live. A paperback copy of Jesus King of Vanessa.
Yeah, we can do that. Yes.
All right.
A review
Thank
copy.
you so much, Ralph. It's always a pleasure. Clayton,
Indeed.
thank you so much. Hope you have a great day, buddy. That's it. That's the show.
Good day, guys.
Thanks, Russell.
Cheers.